Dit was heel opwindend en dankie ook vir al die mense wat vandag hier is. Ons sprekers se geskenke word geborg deur Swartland Wyn en Olywe. En vandag het hulle vir ons Orde Raak se wyne beskikbaar gestel om natuurlik vir die sprekers te gee. So ek roep al die politieke leiers na vore. Dan kan ons begin met ons Wes Kaap wegbreek gesprek. Sit gerus. Sy, hallo. Sy, Rob, please. Agter. Ja, jong, sorry. Hoorie, as jy maak ek met Afrikaans. Nee, dis reg. Ja, dit kan ek doen. Ja, nee, hulle is ook. Nee, maar baie dankie dat jy gekom het. You promoted me from marginal scribbler and political leader. That's it. Oh, pleased to meet you. Yes, yeah. Please have a seat. Heinrich, jy is ook welkom om ons te kom. Sê weer? Griets, maar ons wil graag die gemeenskapsleiers ook hier by. Hoorie kerels, yes, jy sit julle reg in hierdie... Hier wat, ek gaan... Heinrich, skuif bietjie nader aan my asseblief van. Heinrich, kan jy so, ja, skuif uit een aan my, ja. So. Ons weer is koud, maar ek dink nie jy wil so styf teen mekaar sit nie. Dames en here, ek wil graag ons sprekers welkom heet. Ons het vir Dr. Corneille Mulder. Hy is lid van die nasionale vergadering en hoofsweep van die Vryheidsfront Plus en natuurlik leier van die Vryheidsfront Plus in die Wes Kaap se kiesafdeling. Dan het ons vir Jack Miller. Jack, very welcome. You are the leader of the Cape Independence Party. Dan het ons vir Phil Craig. Hy is die leier van die referendumparty. En dan het ons vir Rob Dougan. My Afrikaans is horrible. Hy is die redakteur van die Cape Independent Koerant en hy gaan ook interessante bydraes lewer oor navorsing. En dan het ons vir Heinrich Weingart, hy is die uitvoerende voorsitter van die Kaapse Forum. Ekskuus, ek staan so voor julle. Goed, meneer, kom ons spring weg. Okay, Rob, ons gaan met jou begin. Jy sê jy sal die vrae in Afrikaans hoor, maar jy wil dit graag in Engels antwoord. Nou ek weet, ek kom van die Vrystaat af en ons sukkel met Afrikaans, maar ek weet nie hoe julle Wes-Kaapenaars nie, maar kom ons werk hier aan. Rob, jy doen navorsing oor federalisme. Ja, hoe maak dit in ons grondwetvoorsiening vir die oorgang na 'n federale stelsel van nou, kom ons sê 'n republiek of 'n demokrasie?
Well, the answer to that is you can round that number down to, if you represent it as a number, you can round it down to 0, because while the Constitution considers itself to be, as it says, quasi-federal, I mean, if you actually read the Constitution, you go around to the schedules at the back, Schedule 4 and 5 and everything, the powers of the provinces and the municipal governments are extremely like closely and narrowly defined to very specific policy areas. And like the control that, provinces have over their own budgets is minimal. It was like Western Cape, I think it was like 3% of its budget comes from taxes it raises itself from like speeding tickets and casinos, I think was it. And then the rest, they have to ask the ANC-run treasury for everything else, the other 97%, which is why you're always getting, Jordan Hill Lewis and Alan Windy in the news going like, can we please have some more money? So, yeah, there's absolutely no control, and the only way to you really get the power back more than it is now is to seize it by leveraging provisions, like very underused provisions, one of which has been written by Dr. Corné Mulder, as well as several international sort of treaties that the ANC were foolish enough to sign, which Phil Craig here wonderfully exploited in a bit of legislature that the DA have been too foolish to implement. But there are ways of getting federalism, but it's not going to be system-wide. It has to be a province that has a claim to autonomy for some kind of ethnic or cultural reason that can then claim that right in international law and leverage it against the national government and has the balls to tell the union buildings to go screw themselves. But if you're not willing to seize that kind of power by by force of will, by audacity, you're not going to get it. There's no legislative process where you're going to win it. I mean, you just look at how people are voting. Everyone's going, oh, the ANC are going to lose 50% this year. Wow, what a great opportunity. Reality is, voters in this country are divided into two racial blocks. You've got minoritarian and majoritarian. The majoritarian bloc want black nationalism and hard socialism, if not communism. And that's, ANC, EFF, Umkhonto we Sizwe, right? And that bloc, that voting bloc, has remained static at about 65% for the past 30 years. It doesn't move. It changes within the bloc, but it doesn't move. And then you've got the other sort of, 30+% who are, well, minoritarian, and now they've all clumped together in the multi-party charter. But their chances of winning are slim to none. I know this is a very sort of a blunt thing to say, and probably sounds a bit pessimistic to most people. But, I think knowing what's in your power and what isn't allows you to make smarter decisions. And with Cape Independence, what is in our power in the current legal system is to build legitimacy for it. And then once we've got popular legitimacy through, a referendum is precisely what. And we're very fortunate in that the new Electoral Reform Act actually contains provisions that align referendum legislation with the Constitution. The ANC wrote this themselves. I don't know why they were foolish enough to do this, but they did. And when it passes, it's going to explicitly allow the premiers of the provinces to call referenda. And the second we call a referendum, we're almost certain to win by all the polling research. So the question after that is not, does the Constitution allow us to secede? It's, does the provincial government have the stones to say, the people want it, it's our right? You understand? So that comes down to audacity. Look, Slovenia didn't ask permission to leave Yugoslavia when it was falling apart. They just left. They asked their people and they said, oh, do you want it? Yes, we want it. Okay, bye-bye. And the rest of them waited until it was too late and had to fight each other for nearly 10 years. So, and it's not like there wasn't a sort of violent component to Slovenian secession, but it was more of a threat than a war. It was, and the question we have in the Western Cape is not, are we going to get invaded by the South African military? That seems to me to be a very, very distant and poor possibility. And even if they did, private security companies alone would be enough to back them off. The question is more whether or not we have enough community solidarity, enough community safety organizations to resist the kind of protest disruptions, the kind of stochastic violence that would occur in this process. So that and both that element and the political element are something that rests upon the DA, which is a very unfortunate and weak position we sit in, because the DA are fundamentally opposed to both. They don't like local communities getting involved with community safety. They actively try and move against it. They don't want you to have any say of your own. And they're very hard against Cape independence because the Cape is the most important basis for getting their people into the ANC coalition, which we know is actually 4 of the leaders of the EXCO have publicly stated that this is their preferred aim. And there's that famous leaked audio from Helen Zille from 2017 as well. So there's a thorough answer. It's the DA that's the obstacle.
You're running all your questions.
Sorry. It's just that they're all like interconnected.
But I love it.
So,
I love it a lot. Heinrich, jy is die uitvoerende voorsitter van die Kaapse Forum en glo jy dat federalisme jou gemeenskappe sal bemagtig en gesonder maak? En hoe lyk so 'n vorm van federalisme?
Dankie de Pre. So by Kaapse Forum glo ons aan wat ons noem groeiende federalisme en dit beteken, as jy dit meer eenvoudiger wil stel, dat ons sê gemeenskappe moet bemagtig word om meer vir hulle self te doen. Julle weet, as julle al ooit van Kaapse Forum gehoor het, ons is 'n susterorganisasie van AfriForum en dan by implikasie ook deel van die groter solidariteit beweging. En wat AfriForum doen in Afrikaner gemeenskappe, dit is wat Kaapse Forum in die besonder in Kaapse bruin gemeenskappe wil doen. So ons sê gemeenskappe by wyse van plaaslike munisipaliteite of die provinsiale regering moet bemagtig word om meer van te Pre, daai magte wat in Pretoria of deur Pretoria misbruik word, dat dit oorhandig word, afgewentel word na die provinsie, na gemeenskappe, om eerder self daai funksies uit te voer. En ons glo ons kan dit beter doen in baie opsigte as 'n nasionale regering, ongeag, laat ek byvoeg, wie uit Pretoria regeer. Op die oomblik is dit die mense met die groen, swart en geel kleure in hulle vlag en T-hempies, en ons weet almal waar ons nou is, 30 jaar nadat hulle vir die eerste keer die geleentheid gegee is. As daar ooit 'n behoefte was aan groeiende federalisme, aan meer magte, meer funksies wat plaaslik uitgevoer word, dan is die tyd nou ryp daarvoor.
Jack, you are the signature guy, fighting for signatures, am I correct?
Yeah, I think we all are.
Jack, the DA currently doesn't want to take a clear position on Cape independence. So, as a single issue party, how will that affect your chances at the ballot box?
Well, the truth of the matter is that the DA is very clear on their position. They have come outright opposed to Cape independence, from Helen Zille to John Steenhuisen to Ivan Meyer. They've all made public statements in complete opposition to giving the people of the Western Cape a referendum on Cape independence. So we think this bodes very well for us moving into the elections, because we know from polling that this is an incredibly popular topic amongst voters and citizens in the Western Cape. And the DA is literally lifting their nose to the people of the Western Cape. Now, I'd like to make this conversation a bit engaging with the audience, if you don't mind, because there's a lot of very basic, simple facts that most people don't know. I'd just like to ask the audience, does anyone know, okay, before I ask this question, the DA tells us every single election, it's too close to call, it's neck and neck. If you don't vote DA, the ANC is going to get in. If you don't vote for us, it's going to be an ANC-EFF coalition. Okay? We hear the same story every single election. And unfortunately, voters forfeit. So I'd just like to get a general feel from the public here. Does anyone know what the ANC got in the previous provincial elections in 2019? Any ideas? Anyone? Okay,
15,
well,
20%.
that's 2021. Okay, they got 33%. Okay, the ANC got 33% in the 2019 provincial elections. The EFF got 2%. Collectively, the two biggest African nationalist parties in South Africa got 35% in the Western Cape. That is not out the starting blocks. They have no chance of ever governing the Western Cape. So people need to let that point sink in. Let's move forward to the 2021 elections in the city of Cape Town, which accounts for 70% of the Western Cape population. Any ideas what the ANC got? I'll tell you, 18%. 18%. The EFF got 4%. Collectively, the ANC and EFF got 22% in the city of Cape Town, in which we have 70% of the Western Cape population. So when the DA tells you next time, you've got to vote DA, otherwise the ANC is going to get in, you tell them, stop with your lies, get out the room, and you're wasting our time. So, unfortunately, what people need to realize here is that our enemy is not the ANC. Our enemy is not the EFF. Our enemy, number one, is the DA. They are the only party standing directly obstructing our pathway to a referendum on Cape independence. And as I mentioned earlier, Helen Ziller, Steenhuisen, Ivan Meyer, and of course, Alan Winde, the one person that can actually call a referendum, has been the most fervent in his calls against Cape independence. So if we want a referendum on Cape independence, I would implore the audience to tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell everyone, you cannot vote for the DA. We need to get the DA underneath 50%. At 49%, at 48%, they've got to form a coalition with one of us parties up here, and we will force them to give us a referendum on Cape independence. Thank you very much.
I say, that was emotional and forward. Thanks, Jack.
17 years, it'll make you, get great.
Dr. Wilder, die Vryheidsfront Plus is 'n nasionale politieke party en tog het julle besluit om tot hierdie stryd toe te tree. Waarom?
Ja, kom ek sê baie dankie vir die geleentheid. Het is voorreg om hier te wees, voorreg om te kan gesels. Mense kan hierdie baie wyd gaan haal, maar kom ek probeer jou vraag so antwoord. Die Vryheidsfront, as jy net die party se naam vat, dit gaan oor vryheid. Ons was nog altyd betrokke by vryheid en in Afrika sal jy nie oorleef, veral nie as minderhede, sonder dat jy vry is en jou eie besluite kan neem. So die party is 'n nasionale party, ons het verteenwoordiging in die nasionale parlement sedert 94 deurlopend gehad tot nou toe. Ons is verteenwoordig in 8 van die 9 provinsies, die enigste provinsie waar ons tans nie is KwaZulu-Natal. Ek glo dat na die verkiesing van 24 wat nou kom, sal ons ook in Natal verteenwoordig wees. Maar die werklikheid is dat die Wes-Kaap is vir ons 'n baie belangrike provinsie. Ek self is die verantwoordelike persoon in die party, ek is die leier van die party in die Wes-Kaap. Ek ken die Wes-Kaap, dink ek redelik goed. En die hele ideaal van die Wes-Kaap is anders en die feite spreek vir hulle self. Die ANC het nog nooit hier geregeer en die steun gehad dat hy die meerderheid kon wees om te regeer in die Wes-Kaap nie. Dit was nog nooit die geval gewees nie. So dit was 'n absoluut natuurlike ding om te sê, ons ondersteun die Wes-Kaap, ons ondersteun die gedagte van vryheid, van Cape Exit in die Wes-Kaap. En ek dink mense moet die ding so verstaan. Suid-Afrika is 'n baie komplekse land. Ek wil dit amper so sien, dit is eintlik 'n kunsmatige konstruksie wat tot stand gekom het in 1910. As jy vra wat is hierdie land se naam, dan sê ons Suid-Afrika. Wat beteken dit? Dit is eintlik maar 'n geografiese aanduiding. Waar? Suid in Afrika. Ek het hier kort na 94 het ek 'n onderhoud gehad by geleentheid met 'n Amerikaanse joernalis wat vir my vra, how many people in South Africa speak the language South African? There's no such language. Daarom het ons 11 amptelike tale, ons is 'n baie verskeidenheid land. En as jy vat die geografiese gebied wat bekend staan as Suid-Afrika, dan sê ons standpunt is, dit gaan nie 'n kwessie wees, die oplossing gaan nie wees of die een of die ander nie, dit gaan en wees. Met ander woorde, ons staan by selfbeskikking, ons staan vir vryheid van gemeenskappe, wat insluit onafhanklikheid wat die Wes-Kaap betref, en ons ondersteun dit ten volle, ons is betrokke daarbey. Maar verskillende dele in die land gaan hulle leen tot verskillende forme van selfbeskikking, of verskillende forme van selfbeskikking of vryheid. In die noorde van die land, as gevolg van sekere werklikhede, is dit net nie 'n werklikheid nie. As jy gaan kyk die oorweldigende getalle in Limpopo of in Mpumalanga, maak sekere forme van selfbeskikking net nie moontlik nie. Maar die Wes-Kaap is anders. En nou is die vraag, wil ons terugsit dat die gehaglike situasie wat uitspeel in die res van die land ook spoel oor die Wes-Kaap? Dit sal uiters onverantwoordelik wees. Ek het vir mevrou Zille gesê, die verskil dink ek in 'n sekere mate is dit. Almal stem saam, die Wes-Kaap doen baie goed. Die DA glo, hulle kan die goed van die Wes-Kaap uitvoer na die res van die land. Dit is teoreties klink dit baie moontlik. Ek het vir haar gesê, solank ons nie gaan vir ons eie en ons onafhanklikheid nie, is dit 'n kwessie van tyd voor ons die mislukking van die res van die land ook oordra na die Wes-Kaap toe. Dit gaan nie andersom wees nie, dit gaan verkeerd omgaan. En ons sien dit reeds gebeur. Elke dag wat verlore gaan, vorder die Wes-Kaap ook tot 'n sekere mate agteruit. En die tyd is nie aan ons kant.
Phil, you have put your mind to this in terms of you are writing a federal law, federalisme law. How is it going? And a little, tell us about it.
Sure. Okay, thank you, and great to be with everyone today. So the reality is we proposed a federal law, we drafted the thing, we're no longer pursuing a federal law, and that is, unfortunately, there was no appetite to pass it. So look, as an organisation, now leading the referendum party, we're fighting for Cape independence, but what we have always tried to do is try to build consensus. And I think one of the things that we have to understand is there's a broader movement towards autonomy, as Heinrich alluded. And it's important that actually the first step is that we have to get power away from this ANC national government that the majority of people in the Western Cape have never once voted for. And we looked at options, well, how do the people work together? And so the federal law really came out of the Western Cape Devolution Working Group, where we said, look, let's not worry about our differences. Let's not worry about who wants to end at independence, who wants to end at federalism, and who wants to end at devolution. Let's just take hands and work together to start moving in the right direction. Now, unfortunately, and out of that came this bill. So we proposed something called the Western Cape Federal Autonomy Bill, and the idea was that that this was a first step that we could all agree on. So even though for us we'd want to go to the next step to independence, that we could claim some rights now within the Constitution that would allow the DA to claim the devolution of power, which it said it wanted. It would allow us, and actually what it did is it created, the bill created what was the concept within South Africa of federally autonomous regions, which weren't, because the problem with federalism is you require the constitutional change, which requires a 2/3 majority, which we're never ever going to get. So federalism is undeliverable. And actually with the Western Cape Federal Autonomy Bill, we turned that on its head. We said, well, let's pass a Western Cape People's Bill and claim the right for self-determination of the Western Cape people, because that's a right that already exists. It's in the Constitution, it's in international law. We don't need to change anything in the Constitution that allows it. And we wrote the Western Cape People's Bill in discussions with the DA, and they ultimately lacked the courage to pass that bill and refused to pass it. And I'm eternally grateful that then Corné and his party stepped up and said, well, if you're not going to pass the Western Cape People's Bill, then we're going to table the Western Cape People's Bill and make you vote against it, so we can show where you stand on this issue. And what happened then is the DA then quickly tabled this Provincial Powers Bill as a compromise, and that's why we had those two bills. But the Western Cape People's Bill was just part one. Part two was this Federal Autonomy Bill, and what that would have allowed would have been the Western Cape to claim devolution of policing, to claim devolution of rail, but most importantly, and I think the most important feature in that bill was that it would allow the people of the Western Cape to resist constitutional changes which they didn't vote for. And we've now got Jacob Zuma telling Julius Malema openly on his birthday that we have to work together to get a 2/3 majority so that we can change the Constitution, and we know why, so that they can come with expropriation without compensation. And the key feature of that referendum bill was the right of the Western Cape to veto changes of the Constitution. In other words, if you want to change the Constitution we agreed to in 1994, then you need our consent, because we have a right to self-determination. And if you then want to go and change that Constitution elsewhere, that's fine, but we want to have the right to opt out. So that was the concept of that bill, and the idea of that was that the Western Cape could claim it now, because we have a majority already here, and then other provinces could cut and paste if they wanted to, where, for example, after 2024, the multi-party charter be able to get a majority in Gauteng, so they could pass a Gauteng People's Bill, majority in KZN, and so on. But unfortunately, the DA were not willing to pass that bill, so that option has gone off the table now, and we now are in a situation where our options are very, very clear. We're staring down the barrel of what John Steenhuisen himself calls the Doomsday Coalition, the ANC, the EFF, and MK, who will have somewhere close, but probably not enough, mercifully, but they'll certainly have 60% of the vote or more. And now we're faced with a very, very simple choice. Federalism was always a stretch. There was one way to find it. We went out of our way to try and, the DA had often said, listen, we don't support Cape independence, but we do support federalism. And we did the research, we wrote the bill, we sat it there and said, if you really want to deliver federalism, there is the bill. And they said, no, thank you very much. And interestingly, the reason they wouldn't pass it is they said, it's either federalism for everybody, or it's federalism for nobody, which obviously makes complete nonsense. It's a completely nonsensical position, because the whole point of federalism is that we are not the same and we allow different parts of the country different rights. So ultimately we have to understand that federalism is no longer an option. It was always a stretch. We found the legal workaround, we put it on the table, and unfortunately the DA rejected federalism, and now here we are. If we want to avoid South Africa, well, South Africa is going to become a failed state. It's probably already a failed state. We know after 2024, the future is going to be worse than where we are now. We'll look back and wish for the day that we had the ANC with a slight majority. Better the devil you know. What's coming next is worse, and Cape independence, unfortunately, is the only solution for us in the Western Cape who've never once voted for the ANC government as a majority.
Yes, yeah. Rob, the people here want you to look in the crystal ball, and please, through your research, what do you think? Say it happens. What is the time frame, the influence on people, and maybe the economic impact on the Western Cape?
Ooh, it's always difficult to be 100% certain. I mean, thing is, when you're dealing with something that's such a radical change, you've got to try and read the minds of people powerful people who might react to it. But assuming everything goes well, I think we can pretty much guarantee very, very good economic performance. I mean, we've got very high human development index. We've got a very diverse economy. We're not so lopsided dependent on commodity prices. So we're also not going to be affected by, international business cycles quite as much, although tourism is definitely going to be affected by that. But broadly speaking, the Western Cape is more economically robust. I mean, any kind of products that we rely on from the rest of the country can just be imported through the ports. The ability to repair and get the ports running once you get rid of the ANC's control of it is, you can turn it around a year or two. I mean, it's not like we don't have the equipment. It's literally, embedded cartel agreements with like Grindrod and other companies that have funny holds over. I mean, like Grindrod, for example, is the main gatekeeper to, as I understand it, NASASA, which allows them to prevent new stevedores companies from getting in. The unions that are part of Kasati's network stop operations whenever they feel like it. We've got sort of corrupt, we've got gangs operating in the ports. I mean, all of these things slow things down. And I mean, the fact that we for 20 years had the most corrupt and awful woman running the Transnet's port authorities. I mean, all of these kind of things can be turned around really quickly. So like the Cape has a great future after this. The question is, whether we can get there and what it's going to look like getting there. The trouble is, if everybody wants the same thing, it's actually really easy to achieve. The problem is that you've got this political party called the DA that doesn't really have much interest in how well the Western Cape performs. I mean, their federal executive continually reaches into candidate selection procedures at the provincial level to promote people that they want to kick up. For example, when you've got these viciously corrupt politicians like, Conrad Poel from the Drakenstein, who I've had to deal with destroying my family's been in that town for 350 years. Like, to watch what he's done to it has just been, it makes you grind your teeth at night. And then you've got Memory Boyson over there in Garden Route District Municipality. Both of them, despite, awful corruption for years, very, very directly protected by senior members of the party who are now, after all of the corruption has been made public, are promoting them to the provincial party list. So, like, the problem is mainly national level politicians and their national level strategies, because getting power in South Africa requires nasty, nasty graft or racial domination. It's always been sort of some combination of the two. You know, in the Western Cape, it's small enough that you have a relative access to your own representatives, small enough that we have an understanding of our own communities at this level of organization. Nationally, I mean, you know, these kind of, you know, having an impact on politics is really, really hard work as for anyone. It's not so hard in the Western Cape, as it turns out. So, but what I'm saying is, if we want to get this done, it really is pressure on the DA. And I think the question everyone worries about with violence.
Yeah, that's now my
Yeah.
next question to Heinrich. Heinrich, die Wes Kaap word deur dwelmmisbruik, bendegeweld, geweldmisdaad getuister. En nou, wanneer julle as die Kaapse Forum meer selfbestuur kry, sou dit help om hierdie tipe probleme die hoof te bied? Om hierdie probleme die hoof te bied. As julle meer gemeenskaps, kom ons sê as die krag afwentel na gemeenskappe toe, sal julle meer beheer daaroor kan uitoefen.
Ja, de Pre, miskien moet ek net eers sê, die gesprek het tot nou verskriklik anti-DA geklink. Ek is nie 'n lid van die DA nie, ek is nie afgevaardig om namens die DA te praat nie, maar ek sou vir Jack wou sê, be careful what you wish for, want ons weet, hoe gaan dit in die Weskaap vandag, teenoor hoe gaan dit in die res van Suid-Afrika. En ek vermoed dat jy kan amper met groter sekerheid voorspel, dat op nasionale vlak is daar min of meer een van twee uitkomste, as jy kyk na die wat die peilings vir jou sê, en wat politieke waarnemers voorspel. Jy gaan of 'n ANC kry wat oorleef met die hulp van 'n EFF en ander, of jy gaan in die kans baie skraler daarvoor 'n veelparty handves regering kry, wat ek weet Dr. Mulder graag wil hê moet gebeur. Jou dilemma is dat in die Weskaap, terwyl daar ook onsekerheid is, of terwyl peilings ook vir jou wys dat die DA hier onder 50% kan val, as ons nie so seker wat die uitwerking of die uiteinde daarvan sal wees nie. So ek sal versigtig trap en ek sal eerder kyk of daar nie 'n manier is om tog die DA se arm te draai, om nader te kom aan wat die VF plus Cape Exit, die referendum party, wil hê nie. Kaapse Forum is gelukkig nie besig om stemme te werf nie, so ons kan net praat oor die bemagtiging van gemeenskappe. En ons het 10 fokusareas waarvan polisieering 'n belangrike een is. So dankie vir daai vraag, De Pre. En ons sê juis dat as die provinsie self oor die polisiediens bestuur, dan kan jy self 'n provinsiale kommissaris aanstel, jy kan self besluit hoeveel polisielede waar ontplooi word, en jy kan ook besluit waar daar polisiekantore gebou moet word, eerder as dat jy moet staat maak op Bekkie Cele en die wysheid wat hy onder sy groot swart hoed met hom saamdra. Om dit te kan doen, wil Kaapse Forum hê dat die grondwet se voorsiening wat gemaak word vir provinsiale referendums moet uitgevoer word. Om dit te kan uitvoer, moet daar bepaalde wetgewing ingestel word. En dis die een aanknopingspunt of raakpunt tussen Cape Exit en Referendum Party wat daar bestaan. Ons sê toets dan die inwoners van die Weskaap se siening, se mening oor 'n provinsiale referendum. Ons weet ook, soos wat Phil reeds genoem het, onze premier Ellen Wendy het in 'n vergadering met Kaapse Forum gesê, hy beskou verkiesings as referendums. So hy sien nie 'n nodigheid dat daar referendums gehou moet word nie. Die moeilikheid vir hom is dat binne sy party is daar 'n nasionale leier met die naam John Steenhuisen wat vir Phil beloof het, daar sal 'n referendum gehou word. Daar's ook Helen Zille, die federale voorsitter, wat ook al gesê het, ja, daar's met referendum self nie fout nie. Maar dit moet hulle maar onder mekaar daar uitsort, soos wat ons sê in die Kaap. Jou dilemma is dat as jy hierdie gemengde boodskappe kry as 'n burgerlike samelewing, dan weet jy nie eintlik waar jy staan nie. Maar dis juis waarom mense ook hulle gewig maar moet gooi agter 'n burgerlike of burgerregte organisasie, soos wat Kaapse Forum is. Want terwyl daar hierdie geveg is tussen twee olifante, die VF+ en die DA, oor die sogenaamde Provincial Powers Bill aan die DA kant en dan die People's Bill aan die VF+ se kant, is daar die mense, julle en ek, wat hier sit, wie se regte in daai proses vertrap word. So ek het steeds die hoop dat die VF+ en die DA ook nader aan mekaar sal kom. In my rubriek en rapport, so 2 weke gelede, of nee, dit was 'n artikel en rapport, het ek wat ek noem het 'n Spaanse dans voorgestel. Ek weet nie hoeveel van u dit gesien het nie, maar dit kom basies daarop neer dat ons moet kyk of ons nie iets kan leer uit die Spaanse model uit nie. Dit is in kort dat jy 'n nasionale regerende party het wat nie genoeg steun kry om op sy eie te regeer nie. En eerder om dan nou, kom ons gebruik nou die voorbeeld van die ANC en die EFF. As die ANC onder 50% sou val en 'n vennoot moet soek dat hulle in plaas van om na die EFF toe te gaan, eerder dan 'n VF+ en 'n DA vra, wil julle nie vir ons op nasionale vlak steun, dat ons die president aanwys, julle kry dalk 'n kabinetspos of 2, maar in ruil daarvoor gee ons vir julle meer magte in 'n provinsie soos die Wes Kaap. Dit is wat gedoen word in Spanje, die nasionale of die regerende party daar sê vir die ouens van Katalonië byvoorbeeld, as julle vir ons ondersteun, dan sal ons seker maak dat julle meer regte dan die selfregerende Katalonië kry. Dit lyk vir my na 'n opsie wat meer aandag moet geniet. Maar op die oomblik is daar 2 opsies wat die fokus is, en dit is dat die veelpartye handves se partye glo hulle sal die verkiesing kan wen en dan die regering oorneem. Aan die ander kant het jy dan die ANC wat glo nee, hulle het nie eens koalisie vennote nodig nie. En wat gebeur daar tussenin? Dit is die vraag, De Pre.
Dis die groot vraag, ja. Dr. Mulder, het jy gehoor, Heinrich insinieer dat die DA en die Vryheidsfront nader mekaar moet beweeg. Nou my vraag is, in 'n nuwe Wes-Kaap, Republiek van die Wes-Kaap, dan gaan die hele politieke establishment, kan mens maar sê, die mekaar gekrap word. Hoe sien dokter daai situasie?
Ja, kom ek sê so, dis 'n interessante gesprek en wat Heinrich na verwys rondom die verkiesing op nasionale vlak. Ons kan lank daaroor praat, ek het nogal 'n paar menings daaroor, ek is redelik betrokke by daai proses. Ek dink daar's eensstemmigheid tans in Suid-Afrika dat die ANC onder 50% gaan val op nasionale vlak. Die vraag is hoe ver kry ons hulle afgeforceer? My doelwit is om hulle so ver as moontlik af te kry, so ver dat selfs saam met die EFF die ANC nie by 50% kan uitkom nie. En dit is nie onmoontlik nie. As jy kyk na sommige van die peilings, is die ANC net bo die 40 op die oomblik, maar kom ons kyk hoe speel dit uit. Ek dink die ANC is 'n tipiese organisasie wat besig is om homself te verskeur aan die einde van sy loopbaan, of sy bestaan, maar kom ons kyk hoe dit gaan uitspeel. Aan die ander kant het jy die veelparty handves. Die veelparty handves op sy eie gaan nie by 50% uitkom. Dis nie die probleem nie. Daar is ander politieke partye wat buite die handves staan, wat met die handves groepering sal saamwerk na die verkiesing om 'n koalisieregering moontlik te vorm wat ons by 50% kan verbyvat, maar ons gaan nie dit weet voor die uitslae nie kom as ons begin stemme tel na die 29ste Mei nie. Die Vryheidsfront Plus en die DA is 2 werklikhede, ook spesifiek in die Wes-Kaap. En is dalk onbekend vir baie mense. In 11 van die 25 stadsrade in die provinsie is ons tans in 'n koalisieregering saam met die DA. En dit was 'n verklaarde doelwit voor die tyd om te sê in die laaste provinsiale plaaslike verkiesing, ek wil die DA forceer na koalisieregerings toe. Hoekom? Ek dink dit is regtig 'n beter vorm van regering as jy met ander partye moet saamwerk, kompromieë moet vind, want dan word jy geforseer om die beste antwoorde te vind. Ek hou nie van enige party wat sê net ons weet die beste nie. Dis nonsens, dit bestaan nie. Dis altyd beter as jy met mekaar kan saamwerk en kompromieë vind, en ons het dit op die oomblik, soos ek sê, in 11 van die stadsrade in die Wes-Kaap is ons reeds in 'n koalisie. Ek is absoluut oortuig daarvan dat ons gaan na die verkiesing nou in Mei maand, gaan ons waarskynlik 'n koalisie hê op die nasionale vlak. Ons gaan koalisie hê in Gauteng, ons gaan 'n koalisie hê in KwaZulu-Natal. Dit is nie onmoontlik om 'n koalisieregering te hê in selfs die Noord-Kaap nie. Maar, en ek sê dit baie blaatant, ek het vir Ellen Wendy gesê, nou die dag in Stellenbosch by 'n geleentheid, ek werk voltyds om ook die DA in hierdie provinsie in 'n koalisie in te forceer op die 29ste Mei. Hoekom? omdat dit 'n beter vorm van regering gaan skep as daar 'n koalisieregering is. En ek stem weer, en ek stem saam daarmee met wat Jack gesê het. Dit is 'n infame leuen om kiesers bang te maak in die Wes-Kaap, asof die ANC en die EFF hier 'n bedreiging is. Hulle is nie 'n bedreiging nie. Hulle is nie 'n faktor nie. En dan is dit nogal vir my interessant. Ons het verlede week gehad die sogenaamde Brenthurst Foundation se meningspeiling. Nou die Brenthurst Foundation is 'n oprigting wat kom via die Oppenheimer familie. En hulle maak 'n ongelooflike bevinding. Hulle sê in die afgelope 14 maande, volgens hulle peiling, het die ANC gegroei in die Wes-Kaap van 13% steun na 35. Dis nonsens. Enige mens wat in die provinsie weet sal beweeg weet dit is absolute nonsens. Maar dit is deel van 'n swart gevaar taktiek om kiesers bang te maak en te sê hoe ons moet keer dat die ANC nie oorneem. Die ANC gaan nie oorneem. Kom ek sê en ek kan nie praat namens my kollegas wat hier is en wat ook aan die verkiesing deelneem nie. Tussen die Vryheidsfront Plus en die ACDP gaan ons reeds ongeveer 5% of meer steun hê na die verkiesing. Daar is die DA se versekeringspolis. As dit nodig is en dit gaan nodig wees, sal die Vryheidsfront Plus met die DA in 'n koalisieregering ingaan. Maar ek het 'n voorwaarde. En een van die eerste voorwaardes gaan wees, ons gaan onderhandel oor wanneer vind die referendum plaas, dat die Kaapse mense hulle kan uitspreek in 'n referendum. Dis 'n oneerlike manier wat die DA probeer wegkom deur te sê die verkiesing tel as 'n referendum. Almal weet mos die verkiesing gaan mos nie nou oor onafhanklikheid spesifiek as die enigste aspek nie. Dit is wat in 'n referendum jy mense die geleentheid moet gee om hulle uit te spreek vir of teen. En wat is nou verkeerd daarmee? Dat die kiesers sê of hulle dit wil hê of hulle dit nie wil hê nie. Hoekom skram jy daarvan af weg? So ons is nie in konflik wat dit betref nie. Ek dink ons kan baie goed saamwerk met mekaar. Maar dan moet partye ook bereid wees om te luister na wat die mense op die grondvlak basis sê. En ek dink ons is in vir 'n baie interessante tyd. As jy vat op die breër politiek, niemand weet wat gaan gebeur in die verkiesing wat kom nie. Konto Wesizwe is nou daar, Zuma se party is daar. Zuma kan nie weer president word nie. Hy was 2 termyne klaar die president. Om die waarheid te sê, hy kan nie eers 'n kandidaat op die kandidatenlys wees nie. Want die grondwet is baie duidelik. As jy meer as 12 maande gevangenisstraf gekry het, kwalifiseer jy nie as 'n kandidaat nie. Hy het 15 maande gekry. En as ek dan op ligter trant kan sê, die van u wat dit nog nie oorweeg het nie, oorweeg die politiek. Dit is 'n wonderlike ding as jy siek voel. Die politiek maak mense gesond oornag. Dis ouens wat moet op 'n mediese parool gaan want hulle is klaar met die lewe en dan die politiek en dan gaan hulle weer aan.
Jack, we on the other side of the border, we see masses and masses of people moving towards the Western Cape. And many of them, although they say they don't have, might have bring their ANC sentiments with them. Now, say if you are the leader of the new Republic of the Western Cape, what would you do in that case?
Yeah, this is a question.
Sorry.
My microphone wants onafhankelijkheid from me. Yeah, I mean, it's a question that we get a lot, and it's actually a very simple question to answer. People think that you're going to need massive amounts of resources to build a wall or anything like that, and that's not the case whatsoever. So first of all, an independent Cape will have the exact same immigration policies as any democracy around the world. We will allow anyone to become a citizen of the Cape of Good Hope if they don't have a criminal record, if they have skills that they're going to bring to our country, if they're going to bring value to the citizens of our country. So there's not going to be any hard border in which some people are allowed, other people aren't, just like any country around the world. However, every country around the world needs to have borders which ensure that the resources within that country are not taken advantage of by illegal immigrants. So how do we deal with that issue? Well, it's very simple. Currently, the reason we have such an influx of people from other parts of South Africa, and in fact other parts of Africa, which are coming into the Cape and taking away resources. We have many supporters in the Cape Flats who are today still waiting for houses after 40 years, whereas people who are coming here from different provinces, and in fact other parts of Africa, are getting houses over and above our local populations. It is unacceptable. So the first thing that needs to happen is you need to destroy the incentive which is bringing people into the Cape. So we envision something along the lines of Cape economic empowerment. And it's very simple. It's first come, first serve. If you were born in the Cape or you've been on the housing list for 30 years, you get a house before someone who's been here for 1 year or 6 months. So as soon as the incentives for illegal immigration comes to an end, we're no longer under the DA, which basically is ANC light. So the DA implements ANC light policies. So that's why people from other provinces come here knowing they're going to get free housing, free electricity, free water, and basically free jobs, because they get jobs over and above local populations purely based on skin color. As soon as you get rid of all of that, the incentive for people to want to come here disappears. So that's the most important thing. The next thing is we've got members who used to serve on the Cape Corps. They're now unemployed. We're talking many, many thousands and thousands of people that are looking for work in this field. I can guarantee you, the moment we get the Cape independent, we're not going to have a lack of manpower to enforce the border. The next thing is we're living in the 21st century. You don't need to have a military post at every part of your border. You can have infrared wiring, you can have drones which monitor the perimeter, and you can have your military personnel to attend to areas of greater concern. So the first layer of protecting a country, that's a very simple one in today's day and age. The next thing is you destroy the incentive for illegal immigrants to come into the country. And the third thing is, just like any other country around the world, you have immigration police. So they go around from business to business and go, are you a citizen of the country? Do you have a work permit? Where's your work visa? If they don't have a work permit or a work visa, they need to be deported. It's very simple.
Oh, well done. You do. I don't want to use the word Israel, but not, let's not go there now. Phil, we have seen a lot of violence in KZN, which is, some of it is politically based. And are you scared that after this election, and maybe if you get more independence, would you deal with violence in the Western Cape? What is your feeling?
Thank you. Can I just quickly, I just want to just touch very briefly on Heinrich's comment, because I thought it was a good one, and I think probably we should have a clarification on that. And that is, we probably do, and I listen to us and I think, gosh, we are anti-DA. And I don't think that's the case. I think everybody on this stage recognizes that the Western Cape is in a much better place than the rest of South Africa, because we've had a DA government and not an ANC government. So let's get that out there first. And I think what we are is really frustrated that the DA government that serves us isn't putting the people of the Western Cape first and is not doing the things that it should do. And I think I can speak for all of us. I think that after the elections, we will have to decide when we go into Parliament which party do we throw our support behind. And if it's a choice between the DA and the ANC, and it will, we're all going to throw our support behind the DA. And certainly for the referendum party, we've made that an election promise. Our intent is not to remove the DA from power in the Western Cape. Our intent is to make the DA act in the best interests of the Western Cape people and not instead in the best interests of the DA. And I often describe our party as a party that's walking with a cattle prod behind the DA, saying, go further, have more courage, do what needs to be done. We're not trying to remove them from power, but actually they've been the government in the Western Cape for 15 years with an outright majority, and we don't have devolution, we don't have federalism, we still have massive immigration problems. We've still got chronic unemployment. And actually these issues haven't been solved because the DA simply hasn't had the courage and been brave enough to do what needs to be done to act in the interests of the Western Cape people. And our job, and your job as voters, is to push the DA to be much more brave and much more radical, because we're staring down the barrel of a crisis. And that's the issue. In terms of, so coming back to your question, and thank you for allowing me to do that. Yeah, the violence. So, look, we've what's the situation? Of course, in a situation where you're pushing for more control, there is always the risk of the people that currently have the control saying, well, we want to keep hold of that power. And we have seen in KZN what those issues are. Our assessment is this. We don't think the ANC itself is an issue. I think the ANC will begrudgingly accept Cape independence. Why do I say that? Because the alternative would be unthinkable. They're a liberation party for all of their, which sounds ridiculous given their gross and widespread immorality, but they still have a high opinion of themselves. They're very, very sensitive to the world's view of them. And the notion of the ANC becoming the colonizing power in the Western Cape, which is what they'd be if they opposed Cape independence, is unthinkable. If you have a situation where the Western Cape people, in accordance with the Constitution, vote democratically for independence, and the ANC now use some form of force to deny the Western Cape people their will and impose the ANC's will on the Western Cape, that's unthinkable. Where I think there's a danger is in sporadic, look, and frankly, we haven't got to worry about Julius Malema. We all know he's an absolute big mouth, but he's a bangbroek, and we saw that in Brackenfell. He's not going to be an issue either. He will be dealt with very easy. I think the danger, and where there is a threat, is the people of the ordinary people on the ground, and I think that, which is what we saw in KZN, that potentially people who would have voted no to Cape independence can be stoked up into an uprising, exactly what we saw in KZN. And I think in that there are two things. One, it was absolutely wonderful to see how the KZN riots were put down as communities came together, and I think that's absolutely what happened in the Western Cape. And we've had these great examples, Brackenfell and the taxi strike, and actually let's give the DA credit to that. J.P. Smith was absolutely monstrous in that, and we've seen, and one of the great things, we have started to set a precedent in the Western Cape, that actually the state still does have some power here, and if ordinary people start a uprising that's against the democratic will of the Western Cape people, it's not going to be nice, but it's going to be put down, and it's going to be put down ruthlessly, and so should it be, because our mission is democratic. We want Cape independence on the basis of a referendum which is allowed in the Constitution and based on the democratic will of the people. And if people are then going to fight against that and try to use violence to deny the people of the Western Cape their democratic will, they're going to deserve all they get, and I'm pretty sure they're going to get it.
Thank you. Heinrich, julle soos AfriForum sou julle beskou word as 'n aktivistiese organisasie. Dink jy so iets gaan nog steeds, dink jy julle gaan 'n rol hê in die Republiek van die Wes-Kaap?
So ek het dit duidelik gemaak dat Kaapse Forum nie ten gunste is van afstigting of Wes-Kaapse onafhanklikheid nie. Ons is ten gunste van die afwenteling van magte van nasionale vlak af na plaaslike vlak toe. En as jy my sal toelaat, Dupree, om net vinnig te sê, mense sal dalk weet, vir baie jare politieke skrywer by die Afrikaanse koerante, en daarom lees ek nog graag oor wat gebeur en wat gesê word en luister na wat aan die gangers daar buite. Jy het 'n groter, so die kanse is groter dat die ANC se meerderheid steeds groter sal wees as wat ons dit sal wil hê, selfs al val hulle onder 50%. En die kans is net so groot dan dat die DA se steun in die Wes-Kaap so laag kan val, maar hulle steeds die meerderheidsparty is, en dan sit jy met 'n situasie waar daar 'n klomp, ek is jammer om die woord te gebruik, maar splinterpartye is. Elkeen so 'n bietjie persentasie, maar nie genoeg om 'n werklike tweede koalisie vernoot te wees nie. Wat is die gevaar daarvan? Dat ons dalk onstabiliteit in die Wes-Kaap kan kry, terwyl ons nou redelike stabiliteit het teenoor die res van die land. Ek sou veel eerder wil hê dat daar 1, 2 of 3 partye liewer saam met 'n DA dan nou regeer, as wat jy vir die VF plus 3% gee vir Jack, 0,6% gee vir Phil, 0,3% gee vir Rob. Wat wil jy? Want ons moet mooi dink daar, ons moet baie mooi dink daaroor as ons gaan stem. En laat ek dit net gou ook sê, asseblief de Pre, ons groter probleem is nie noodwendig die sogenaamde instroming nie. Jy het instroming uit die Oos-Kaap, ja, en dis waarop ons meestal fokus, maar jy het ook 'n ander soort instroming uit die noorde, uit Gauteng uit. En wat die twee bymekaar bring, is die druk wat dit op infrastruktuur plaas. Die infrastruktuur wat ons tans het, is nie gebou om 'n klomp mense uit Gauteng of vir die Oos-Kaap uit te akkommodeer nie. So wat jy dan nodig het, is dat die Wes-Kaap 'n groter hap moet kry van wat die tesourier tans vir hulle gee, of vir die provinsie gee. En dis hoekom Kaapse Forum ook praat van belastingfederalisme, gee vir die Wes-Kaap dit wat hom of haar toekom. Dit gebeur nie tans nie. Ons moet eerder daarop fokus, en as die partye dalk net hulle energie bietjie meer daaraan wil bestee, dan gaan ons dalk 'n beter Wes-Kaap ook kry. Ek moet net dit sê, en dis 'n pluimpie aan Phil. Phil het verlede jaar een van die beste dinge gedoen wat hulle in die Wes-Kaap gebeur het, wat die politiek aanbetref. Hy het politieke partye en burgerregteorganisasies byeengebring in 'n Wes-Kaapse, in Engels het hulle dit genoem, alles mos Engels, Western Cape Devolution Working Group. Die VF Plus was daar, Jack was daar, Phil was daar, Rob het sy verskyning daar gemaak, AfriForum is daar, Kaapse Forum is daar, ander politieke partye is daar. Daai werksgroep het organisasies en politieke partye met uiteenlopende menings oor of dit nou afstigting is, onafhanklikheid is, of net gewoon die afwenteling van magte, waarvoor vir die grondwet natuurlik voorsiening maak, het Phil byeengebring. Toe ontstaan nou die fight tussen die VF Plus en die DA, en toe loop die werkgroep dood. Daarmee saam besluit Phil toe, hy gaan nou sy eie party stig, en nou is daar nie meer, soos wat ons hier sit, daai fantastiese inisiatief, waar ons besluit het, ons gaan saamwerk op die kwessies waaroor ons saamstem, al verskil ons in wese oor die uiteinde, of die eindpunt wat ons wil bereik. En hier sit ons nou voor die verkiesing, en ek is bekommerd julle, want as jy die DA se steen gaan versplinter, dan gaan jy met groter moeilikheid hier sit as in Pretoria. En ek hoop steeds dat Dr. Mulder al sy politieke wysheid van die afgelope hoeveel jaar, 40 jaar? 36 jaar, ja, sal gebruik om tog 'n oplossing te vind. Ek weet, dis dalk nou iets wat onmoontlik lyk, maar ons leef in Afrika en in Suid-Afrika altyd met goeie moed en met hoop.
Ek wil daarom net sê vir al hierdie paneellede, ek glo nie een van hulle weet nie, maar Helen Zille was wel vanoggend hier vir die media ontbyt, maar kom ons laat dit daar. Rob, wat sou jy sê, Rob, what would you say the best vehicle for the Western Cape? Would it be a federal state, maybe a canton, or, yeah, in your research, what did you decide?
Are you talking about like an ideal
Yeah,
constitution
for
an independent Cape?
Would you want a separate country or a federal state? Or,
okay. From
or
that
a
perspective,
a
I thought you
canton.
were
I don't know,
talking
is canton the right word, like they do in Europe?
I don't know. It depends what you mean. Do you mean like how best should we see ourselves in relation to South Africa, or assuming we're already independent?
So your political vehicle, how would you strive
the vehicle to get there.
To get
Oh.
there, yeah. Yeah, like Switzerland has cantons. You know how they have a sort of autonomy.
That's all. You can talk theory till you're blue in the face, but you really have to deal with the realities in front of you. I think Heinrich Weghart sort of brought up something that's been a massive irritation for me for like the past year or two. So at the time the Western Cape Devolution Working Group was put together, I was contracted by AfriForum to write a report, and a detailed one, on the opportunities for devolving power to the Western Cape under the current constitution. I wrote a 99-page document. That's like A4, in Word. 99-page document, all the different angles that you can take to devolve power to the province that are permissible by any combination, however far you stretch it, of legislation, government frameworks, constitutional interpretations, anything I came up with. And by the end of it, I'd realized that the DA had spent the last 15 years playing with their belly button. They hadn't done a single thing. There were dozens and dozens and dozens of opportunities for getting significant, if moderate, power in various areas. Some of them very significant possibilities, some of them not very significant, but there was opportunities. The reality is if they started now, they'd have to wait another 15 years before they got even this tiny modicum of autonomy that they would grab. They wouldn't get budgetary autonomy. That would require very creative and possibly fraudulent accounting for them to achieve anything of the sort. Or they'd have to turn us into a massive giant casino. But what ended up happening is I sort of, I had the sort of preliminary sort of draft of what Phil Craig was working on, and I sort of put it at the punchline. Like, you can do this. You can leverage your claims to autonomy in the international arena. If that doesn't win, basically it's easier to get independence straight out than it is to get any form of autonomy, except for, again, the model that Phil Craig brought up. And because that's being rejected by the DA, look, there's still enough time for the DA to change their minds, but I don't see it happening. Okay? So, look, these are really our options. If you want to have any control of your government in a meaningful way, and I'm talking about the essential stuff, public transport, policing, budget, power, major infrastructure like water and all of this, well, you're going to have to get independence. There's no other way around it. Now, to complete the question, you're going to ask yourself, okay, well, what kind of government do we want to have afterwards? Are we going to have, we're going to have a Swiss cantons? Well, Swiss cantons only work because each of the cantons has an ethnically contiguous community over there. Like, that's a German canton, that's a French canton, that's an Italian canton, and that's the Romansh canton, right? Everyone, you understand that everyone agrees on the same sort of values and political ideals and the way of life and how to regulate things. So they can all diverge in their own little ways, and at a national level, all they take care of is, trade, defense, more or less, and immigration is even dealt with at the canton level. But we can't do that in South Africa. We can't do it in the Western Cape because all of our communities are spread out and interspersed. So there's no way of carving out a segregated canton in the Western Cape anywhere. It's just not practical. It doesn't reflect the reality. The way you design your constitution has to reflect the people you're governing, or it's going to be absolute garbage, and most of the time you're going to spend your time coercively intervening in people's lives to manipulate them into being the mass that you want them to be. And that's what the current government's doing. They've decided that what South Africa really is it's a black country, and it's a communist country, and we just have to slowly steer everyone into that reality over a generation or two. I mean, National Democratic Revolution, Cyril Ramaphosa announced, phase 2, so now we're getting things like national health, nationalization of the health sector, prevention of parents for participating in their child's education, expropriation without compensation. We've got the district development model, which centralizes government all the way down to the municipality and gives the government that you vote for at a local or provincial level no say in how you're running things. He's going to do prescribed assets, which means the private sector doesn't have a say in how they invest their money. And that's what's going to happen because they've decided that this country is a thing that they imagine it is, instead of what it really is. And they're going to make everybody move into that goal. And that leaves all of the minorities out of the equation who are going to be gradually and more forcibly excluded from the country over time.
Sure, yeah, that's a sober way to look at it. Guys, we are running out of time. I think we already are way beyond it. And I see these politicians, they are moving in their chairs. They want to go and get some votes. Dr. Mulder, die laaste vraag. Ons sien dit in die westerse wêreld en ons wil dit in die Wes-Kaap dadelik stopsit. Ons praat van die woke agenda. Ons praat van rasisme, van laer verwagtinge eens voorheen bevoordeelde groepe en dan natuurlik die apartheidsswaard wat oor wit mense se koppe hang. Gaan julle iets aan kan doen in die Wes-Kaap?
Kom ek begin deur te sê, die hele gedagte van onafhanklikheid in die Wes-Kaap is nie 'n konflikmodel nie. Inteendeel. As daar iemand is wat dink ons kan nog 5 jaar of 10 jaar aangaan soos dit nou is onder die ANC, dan dink ek jy is nie wakker nie. As ons die ANC nog 5 jaar moet los om hierdie land verder te vernietig, dan is daar niks oor nie. Die hele gedagte van vryheid of onafhanklikheid in die Wes-Kaap is absoluut die teenoorgestelde van 'n konflikmodel. Dit is 'n positiewe model om te wys Hoe kan dinge wees in Suider-Afrika? Ons het net nou vinnig gepraat oor grensbeheer en daai tipe van goeders. Dit sal mos in die Wes-Kaap se belang wees dat die ekonomie van sy buurman langsaan suksesvol is. Dat die ekonomie groei, dat daar werksgeleenthede is, dat mense gelukkig kan wees en in vrede met mekaar kan saamleef. Dis nie 'n konflikmodel nie. Wat die DA betref in die Wes-Kaap, Hendrik kan ontspan. Die DA se stem gaan nie versplinter nie. Ons gaan net die nodige gedeeltes daarvan wegvat. Dis al wat ons gaan doen. Dit is nie versplintering nie, dit is 'n werklikheid. En die DA moet homself blameer as dit gebeur, want as jy nie uiting gee aan wat die mense wil hê wat jy wil lei nie, dan sal dit gebeur. Maar dit is nie 'n probleem nie. Ek dink die DA sal ook met hulle sinne kom wat dit betref, dat wat ons in 'n koalisie kan saamwerk, maar dat ons in die regte rigting gaan. Die hele debat oor die afwenteling van gesag, devolusie, is bietjie van 'n droombenadering wat nie gaan realiseer nie. Ek sit in 'n vergadering in die parlement, dan kom die minister van polisie, Bekkie Cele, daar. Waar gaan dit? Dit gaan daaroor dat die precinct of parliament, daai ou klein stukkie rondom die parlement, ons het nie beheer oor wat polisieering betref nie. Daar gebeur insidente. Daar's sulke rooi ouens met sulke rooi uniformpies. Ek praat van die Teletubbies wat daar moeilikheid maak en ons kan dit nie uitsorteer. So die parlement kom en sê ons wil ons eie beskermingsmag hê op die precinct of parliament onder beheer van die speaker om daar beheer te vat. Die minister van polisie kom wat sê hy? Nou, nie vir die DA nie, vir die eie ANC wat in die parlementêre terrein wil beheer hê. We are not prepared to let go 1 inch of South Africa in terms of policing. Dit is wat gebeur op nasionaliseringsvlak heel bo. Hulle is nie van plan om dit prys te gee nie. Nou, as jy kyk na die groter prentjie van Suid-Afrika, as ons praat van onafhanklikheid in die Wes-Kaap, tydsgewys, moenie dit ons vergeet wat 2 jaar gelede gebeur het in KwaZulu-Natal nie. Oornag was dit chaos en opstand en moeilikheid. Dit was toevallig teen besighede en teen daai goeders. Ons weet nie wat kan gebeur oor 'n jaar of oor 'n maand of oor 2 maande as daardie tipe konflik draai teenoor minderhede in Suid-Afrika in die noorde. Gaan ons dan nog sê ons skram weg van onafhanklikheid af want dit klink nie populêr nie. Ons wil miskien nou maar kyk of ons iets anders kan doen oor tyd en devolusie. Nee. Ons sal nie in Afrika oorleef as ons nie beheer kry oor geografiese gebied wat ons self beheer, self bestuur en self vorentoe vat. Nou in terme van as jy vra oor die woke agenda, die wêreld het mal geword. Dit is absoluut gekheid as jy kyk wat internasionaal aangaan in terme van die woke hele benadering. Alles wat reg is, alles wat normaal is, alles wat die korrekte is nou kampstig verkeerd. Nou het ons 'n keuse. Jy kan stil bly en saam met dit gaan en maak of dit oukei is. Of jy kan daai wonderlike bevrydende woord gebruik wat sê nee. Dis 'n wonderlike woord. Ons moet hom baie meer oefen. Nee. Ons mag nee sê. Want ons weet daar's ander waardes, daar's ander goed wat belangriker is en wat reg is. En ek sou graag wil sien dat ons hier van die Wes-Kaap af 'n bastion word van wat reg is, van wat goed is. Daar's mos geen rede. En as ek net 'n visie kan gee, droom saam met my vir 'n oomblik. Gaan sien 'n korridor wat ontwikkel Wes-Kaap wat opkoppel na die Noord-Kaap toe, deur Namibië tot by Angola. Dink net die potensiaal. As jy na die Suider-Afrika kyk of Suid-Afrika kyk van vandag, dink in terme van die oplossing lê Suid en Wes. Noord en Oos is 'n probleem, maar Suid en Wes is waar die oplossing lê. En daar's soveel potensiaal van die buitekant af om ons te help om dit te kan ontwikkel. Ons gaan dit doen. Daar's geen twyfel daaroor nie. Ek hoop ander partye kom aan boord en verstaan dit. As hulle dit nie doen nie, sal die geskiedenis hulle wegvee.
Meneer, baie dankie. Ek dink hierdie was 'n sinvolle gesprek. Hier was so 'n bietjie stemwerwing, maar kom ons laat dit daar. En so ek wil vir julle almal vra, julle moet net so oombliekie sit. Is hier vrae uit die gehoor uit? Is daar iemand? Ag, Gideon, wil jy gou vorentoe kom nie asseblief man? Ja nee, ons is al ver oor ons tyd.
So my headmaster referred to English as the language of the Antichrist. I do not share such strong opinions of it, but for the sake of brevity and keeping it expedited, I'm just going to speak the language of the Antichrist this afternoon. So I think everyone has a firm grip on reality, different perspectives. I think one thing that I'm definitely counting on going forward is, regardless of the election result and how that margin moves, the one thing is certain that in a large swathe of South Africa, the current vacuum of order and the chaos that fills it is probably going to carry on. It might intensify, it might get worse. And a sound strategy in all likelihood, and I'm not saying one should abandon the pursuit of independence. In fact, I think it's supremely important that that is done. But at the same time, you can hedge your bet by starting without asking permission, building structures from the bottom up that will hopefully meet what's being done from the top down. Because even if the Western Cape, not even if, let's be optimistic, when the Western Cape becomes an independent country, it is a large task to inherit an extremely dysfunctional civil service, whether we're talking about the economic side to it or the safety and security side of it, and try and turn this oil tanker around, try and purge it of the deployed cadres that has been the practice for 3 decades. However, if you've got a very active civic structure and civil structure embedded in its communities, already very effective there, you de-silo it, and you're not centrally managing it, but you're assisting it to better coordinate amongst itself for mutual assistance, whether that's from the colored communities in the Cape to the more landed Afrikaner farming communities to other urban communities. That's giving you a resource to work with. Now, does that figure into some of the planning here? Because if it does, then I think there's some very productive conversations that can be had.
Wie sien kans hiervoor? Rob?
Yeah, so I think Gideon knows that we've had conversations here about this one already. I think sort of community preparedness, it's obviously a road that most of the rest of South Africa is already taking, but in the Western Cape things haven't been quite so bad, so we've been a bit slow to get ready for this. I mean, we're not so intensely ready with firearms training and everything as the Valis are, but we're getting there. The importance of this, like the whole Cape independence process, is interesting, and where it dovetails with it is quite important because, as I mentioned, there is a possibility of violence coming up, and it'll probably be crowd violence, violent protests, things like this. This is probably the biggest factor that we're going to have to be concerned about. And the biggest defense against this is private security and community safety organizations, because the police are owned by the national government. So are they going to show up and do their job? Doubt it. I mean, who solved the taxi riots? It was the Metro Police, right? So it's local competencies, local communities. Those are the people who need to work together. I mean, our private security outnumber police by, what is it? Is it 3-1? Is it 4-1? What is it? Okay. Well, it's a big number. The ratio is a big number. So we're already stronger than the police. The military becomes a more complicated question, so I won't go there. But, we're stronger than the police. We can handle these things ourselves, provided we have the confidence to do it. And that requires sort of organizing not only at a community level, but getting the community organizations to work together and represent themselves against local governments that might want to interfere, and be able to organize in times of emergency. I mean, up in the north, they've got these joint operation committees, so if there's like a big riot or something, everyone gets together, they pool their intelligence, It's that sort of ability to work together and come together quickly that's very, very, very useful. And I think for those communities up in the north, and I think this is actually a very important comment that I think I wish I'd said sooner in this conversation, and it's people in the north look at Cape independence and think, well, okay, cool, but if you go, what happens to us? I think that's the scariest question for anyone to answer, because there's no second Cape. So, I mean, this is actually a problem I've spent quite a while staring at, and it's part of the solution that I've been looking at with Solidarity. I'm working on a research project with them. Can't disclose too many fine details, but the broad aspect of it is trying to make the Anchor Town program more robust and accelerated, shall we say. The reality is that with expropriation without compensation coming, and all of the other measures that I mentioned that Ramaphosa is trying to push down with his really aggressive reform program, which people don't seem to comment on because they're looking for liberal reforms, so they're not looking at the communist reforms. But the thing is, this is going to threaten capital, and capital is necessary to build almost anything. So if you want capital, you're going to need the Cape to be independent because it's going to keep that capital safe that you can use to rescue the communities up north, much in the same way as the Cape's capital rescued the Afrikaans communities up north in the interwar period. The Help Mekaar beweging, right? We know about this. So, yeah, community solidarity works whether you're in the Cape or outside. It's very valuable. It's very important.
Meneere, ons is lankal verby ons tyd. Ek weet nie, lyk my hier's nog een vraag. Kan ons dit die laaste vraag maak asseblief?
Goeiemiddag meneere. Ek sal Afrikaans praat of ja, my name is Morgan and this is my observation. And I'm from the Western Cape and I believe that everyone here is brown, just a different shade of brown. And die bruin mense in die Wes Kaap is die meerderheid in die Wes Kaap. En vir jou om te sê there's a Cape exit. And I've listened to you, Jack, when you said that say for instance, there is already an exit and the Cape is independent. What I don't like when you said that the people that's on the housing list, for example, first come, first serve, it is like continuing what's currently happening in this country, where people are dependent on the state. And we cannot have that in the new state. We need brown people to contribute to the economy. They need to be independent, not wanting or waiting for the state to give them housing, but they need to buy their own housing. So that say to me, whoa. You want to keep the people of the Cape Flats, the brown people, dependent on the state, which means that the minority will still control the majority. That's what I'm hearing. And I must be very honest, it will never happen. Because the brown people is the indigenous people of this land, and it belongs to us. One way or another, we will get it back.
Sure, Jack, is jy gereed vir daai? Are you ready for that one?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, the gentleman obviously hasn't read our manifesto because we go into great detail about what our vision for an independent Cape would be. The danger, though, is that to move from where we currently are in the system, and this was mentioned earlier, where we have so many people that are dependent on the state, to just put an end to that straight away, day one of independence, it's just, you're going to have mayhem in the streets. It just can't be done. So what we have is a system, a deeply embedded socialist system in South Africa. And to go to Gideon's question, our vision for an independent Cape is for it to be as decentralized as possible. And I know the Sakeliga organization very well, and the various people involved in it. And moving forward, an independent Cape cannot be a copy and paste replacement of the failure of South Africa, which has failed under the ANC regime now, failed under the apartheid government, but failed in its beginning when the British Empire forced us into this false union in 1910. We're opposed to this entire centralized system. We need to envision a new type of country. I don't agree with Rob when he says that he doesn't think a canton system can work. We absolutely believe it's the only system that can work in a country that is as diverse as the Cape is. We don't have much time, but I mean, I'd love to go into detail as to why I think that would be the case. But we cannot have a black economic empowerment system in place in which the majority people of the Cape are treated as third-class citizens. And so that is something that we need to address. We need to make sure that it's a first-come, first-serve citizenship. Jobs should not be going to people that are not citizens of a country. Nowhere in the world do you have that. That's called illegal immigration. And so we need to make sure that the economy in the Cape is for the people who live in the Cape. And as you correctly pointed out, the colored population is by far the majority in the Cape, and that's always going to be the case. So it would be a benefit not just to the coloured people, but anyone who calls the Cape their home.
Kyk, ekskuus, kan ek net gou, ek dink wat Jack probeer sê is die Wes-Kaap het 'n vermoë om, of kom ons stel dit so, as die Wes-Kaap onafhanklik is daar 'n groter vermoë om die ekonomie te laat groei en outomaties word mense wat van die staat afhanklik is in werks geplaas wat hulle natuurlik nou sal toelaat om hulle eie huise te koop. So ek dink dis 'n komplekse vraag, maar ons kan nog gelukkig nie aangaan nie. Dr. Mulder, net gou, u wil ook op daai vraag antwoord. Ek wil net so 30 sekondes asseblief.
Sorry, can I just briefly say there, the education system also, you can't have people who have Afrikaans as a first language, having teachers that don't communicate in their taal or going to a hospital or a police force, and you can't report a crime because the people there can't speak your language. So as soon as you start to fix those issues, and you got to start with the kids, so by the time they get to 18, then yes, they shouldn't have state housing. They shouldn't be reliant on the government. We don't want to be handing fish to people. We want to be handing people fishing rods and teaching them how to fish. And that's another thing that would go back to the people of the Cape, is fishing rights, which the ANC have taken away. So I mean, you and I can have a long conversation after this. I'll explain exactly what an independent Cape will look like. And I agree with your statement. We can't have a country that's reliant on the government.
Ja, 3, 4, 5, 6. Ek wil net in 2 sekondes sê. Suid-Afrika is 'n baie gekompliseerde land van verskillende gemeenskappe reg oor Suid-Afrika. As jy praat van die Wes-Kaap, in die hele Suid-Afrika in totaliteit is die bruin gemeenskap 'n minderheid. In die Wes-Kaap is die bruin gemeenskap die meerderheid. Alright? So as jy praat van 'n referendum, is dit juis die hoofgeleentheid wat my betref om die gemeenskappe van die Wes-Kaap, waarvan die bruin gemeenskap die meerderheid is, die kans te gee om hulle uit te spreek hoe sien hulle die toekoms wat hulle direk gaan raak. En ek sou graag visualiseer dat 'n nuwe onafhanklike Kaap vorentoe moet 'n plek wees van gelyke geleenthede vir almal wat daar is, maar die werklikheid gaan altyd wees dat die bruin gemeenskap sal die meerderheid wees in daardie nuwe staat. En ek kan nie voorsien dat daar 'n probleem kan wees hoekom ons as gemeenskappe nie met mekaar kan saamwerk, saam pad vorentoe loop ensovoorts. As jy van die Vryheidsfront Plus se kant af kyk, ons is 'n party vir alle gemeenskappe. Ons het mense uit alle gemeenskappe saam, ons loop die pad basies saam. So die geleentheid in die Wes-Kaap is naamlik, as ek nou mag moedswillig wees, ek dink nou is ek op gevaarlike grond. Ek dink die bruin gemeenskap moet baie sterker na vore kom en vir hulle self uitspreek oor presies hoe sien hulle ook die toekoms en dit nie oorlaat net aan ander gemeenskappe om te praat nie. Maar dis maar net 'n mening wat ek dink. Ek dink dis deel van die debat vir vorentoe.
Meneere, baie dankie. Ek sê vir Dr. Corneille Mulder van die Vryheidsfront Plus, baie dankie vir Jack Miller van die Cape Independence Party, Phil Craig, leier van die Referendumparty, en Rob, gaan ek jou naam van uitspreek of nie, redakteur van Cape Independent, en Heinrich Weingart van die Kaapse Forum. Baie dankie. Ek dink hier was 'n opwindende gesprek en hopelik doen ons dit weer. Sterkte.